We slipped the last hawsers off the pier just after dawn, and I felt the deck tremble beneath my boots as the engines came ahead. Slow at first, then with a purposeful churn that vibrated through the steel rail. The harbor was a bowl of vapor, gray on gray, with gulls wheeling somewhere beyond the whistle. I stood in the cramped radio shack just abaft the bridge, watching moisture bead and slither down the window. My breath ghosted the glass. Code books sat in their leather straps, heavy as scripture, but for the moment the receiver offered only the polite hiss of the traffic list. Departures feel the same on every crossing. Diesel tang, tugboat coal smoke, the odd braid of eagerness and dread, yet the calendar on the bulkhead reminded me it was January 1943. Yard welders were churning Liberty hulls out faster than sailors could christen them, and U-boats waited beyond the bellbuoy for a taste of fresh paint. Forward, the cargo hatches were dogged down, canvas tops already crusted with sleet. Boatswain's mates worked in muffled silhouettes, their voices swallowed by fog that smelled faintly of coal dust and tides. Somewhere aft a winch clanked. The chief's terrier yapped once, silenced by a glare none of us could manage, then disappeared below. I tuned the set, sliding my dial across stations, letting dots and dashes trickle through headphones, each letter a footstep on an invisible gangway. A man could feel less alone listening to Morse, even when none of it was meant for him. The convoy assembled beyond the breakwater. 37 freighters shuffling into 9 columns, 6 escorts circling like sheepdogs. Funnels and masts appeared and vanished in the murk, suggesting monsters or saints, depending on the angle of light. They say there's safety in numbers. I've read cargo summaries recovered from broken hulls. One torpedo in the right place can make arithmetic meaningless, long before you can sign off a message. I penciled call signs of our neighbors on a fresh pad: HBJP, QLST, ZDAX, steadying the paper with a half-gloved hand as a swell from the estuary rolled under. Not storm yet, just the sea clearing its throat. At 8 bells, I ducked below for coffee, steel mug too hot to grip. Lingered by the galley port where wind hissed through a cracked gasket. A distant ping resonated through the hull, one of the escorts bouncing sound off harbor mud even inside the anchorage. The cook grinned, gold tooth flashing, and promised, reassuring, we'd be snug behind the destroyers. I answered with the sort of smile that changes nothing. Back topside, the fog tore in ragged curtains, and for a moment I glimpsed shore. Warehouses, bomb-scarred brick, a dock crane frozen mid-salute, a final wave from a stevedore dissolved in haze. The ship's whistle hooted, long and plaintive, last goodbye. Then we nudged into station, our pace a modest 9 knots that tankers could match. Column 3, third astern of the Commodore, center of the flock, ominously ideal for wolves. I shelled the thought and logged departure time. Hours blurred into routine. Weather dispatches in cipher, signal checks, the ceaseless static quilt stitched by thunderstorms over Spain. On 16,000 kilohertz, the BBC crackled with news of Stalingrad holding. On 9,630 came arrogant Berlin's arrogant weather report, clear as a knife. Thoughtful. Submarines tune into that too. Musing. Everyone fishes in the same pond. By noon, the fog lifted. Pale sunlight slid across the deck, glinting on the 20mm mounts as gun crews drilled by number 2 hold. Men joked about whose turn it was to swab barrels when sleet thickened, but laughter never reached their eyes. I stepped outside, let the cold slap me alert. Sleet needles stung my cheeks while unseen bombers rumbled eastward overhead. Late afternoon, the barometer sagged. It always starts small. A needle twitch, then a sure descent, like a decision already made. The watch officer penciled a red arrow on the bridge board. The Icelandic low was digging in. We all knew the sequence. Wall of cloud, sleet like gravel, seas tall as tenement roofs. The North Atlantic takes no bribes and returns no apologies. I inventoried spare tubes, tightened antenna couplings, cleaned contacts, busy work that steadies the mind. Each trough slammed the stern hard enough for the propeller to cavitate, sending shudders through bulkheads. Night would bring worse, and rough seas are a submariner's cloak. Dusk smeared the horizon, sunset a brief orange bruise before cloud swallowed it whole. Bridge lamps went hooded. Only red light remained. I tuned the receiver low, headphones clamped, ready for watch. GKOT, our call sign, echoed in my head. Dash, dot, dash, dot, dot, dash, 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 dot, dash. Habit can be prayer. Wind climbed the tonal ladder, whistling through stays, rattling the shack's thin walls. Sleet rattled like gravel on tin. From the mess deck came the clink of lashed cutlery. The captain stopped by, oilskin dripping. "Any traffic?" he asked. "Nothing critical, sir." He nodded, left without comment. Command's loneliness trailing him down the companionway. Full dark. Swells slapped the bow with bone-gouging force. Convoy lights were masked, each hull a smudge in alternating black. Once every few minutes, a wave hoisted us high enough to glimpse an escort's silhouette, spray exploding off her bows, before we slid back into gloom. Near midnight, a faint call surfaced. 3 letters repeated in a trembling fist of code. I twisted the dial, pressed headphones tight. Signal faded, then burst clearer. F, M, something lost in static. Not one of ours, straggler or independent. I swung the direction finder. The needle quivered without pointing home. "Logged it," informed the bridge. Officers exchanged careful stares under red glow. Our formation tightened by half a cable. A fresh weather bulletin barged in on the same frequency, hammering the faint distress flat. When silence returned, only static remained. The wind outside clawed rigging, the sea getting personal. The storm arrived unseen, announced by violence rather than spectacle. A solid gust slammed the shack, sleet sheeting sideways like tracer rounds. Through the port, I saw deck lights shimmer on a glaze of ice. Starboard lifeboat hammered its gripes, canvas cover flogged like a dying gull. I logged weather again. Wind force 8 and climbing. Visibility 1 cable in squalls. Escort frequency buzzed. Destroyer captain ordering tighter intervals. Wind snatching half his words. Unease threaded his voice. Storms strip away tidy doctrine. Each ship measures survival in hull, steel, and luck. Then it happened. Out of ragged static, 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, hammered in frantic rhythm. SOS! Followed by a name I'd never copied. The signal peaked. Voice carrier smeared by atmospherics. Urgency. Impossible to mistake. Position none. Cargo? Unknown. Just a mortal plea in the dark. I froze a heartbeat. Felt the hull flex, heard sleet drum overhead, tasted the copper of adrenaline. Fingers found the key. I transmitted acknowledgement. My reply vanished into wailing static. The distress repeated, faintly, weaker. The ocean was busy swallowing someone. A wave hoisted our bow, dropped it so hard the keel sounded like thunder. Lights flickered. Someone's glass lamp shattered aft. I glanced at the clock. 00:17, night barely underway. I tore the signal pad sheet, dashed to the bridge. The captain read it, jaw working. "Hold course," he said, voice steady yet stretched. "Keep listening. They'll send again." Back in the shack, I sealed the door against wind that screamed like a living thing and leaned toward the set. Static rolled like surf on pebbles. Beyond it, almost imagined faintly ghost of that SOS. Somewhere ahead a storm roared and a stranger called for help. Desperate, I sat in crimson gloom, counting heartbeats between static bursts, wondering who would vanish next. Anxiously, wind and sea conspired through the long hours after midnight, shaking the ship like a terrier with an old shoe. I sat braced against the bulkhead, headphones biting my skull, the telegraph key poised under 2 fingers that tingled from cold and nerves. Static came in sheets, crashing like surf, maddening in its refusal to resolve into words. Now and again, the receiver opened on a ragged whisper of Morse, half of a sentence, a plea cut short by atmospherics. I wrote each fragment anyway, pencil scraping damp paper, because routine keeps panic at arm's length. A deeper groan echoed through the hull as we pitched into a trough. The shack's overhead lamp swung in its gimbal, red glow arcing across battered lockers. Outside, sleet rattled hard enough to sound like machine gun bursts. Somewhere forward, the boatswain's mates fought to lash down a companionway hatch that tried to tear itself free. The ship flexed, rivets protesting, and my coffee mug skittered off the bench, spraying bitter dregs across the deck plates. I wiped it with my sleeve, without looking away from the dial. 1:30 a.m. The faint carrier I'd been chasing flared again, stronger this time, and I seized the headphones tighter. Urgent. SOS, SOS, SOS. Strained. This is SS Chatham. Torpedoed. Weekly. Position 55 north, 08 west. Desperate. Heavy list. Pleading. Need immediate assistance. My heart slammed so hard it overpowered the engine thrum. Those coordinates lay 50 miles off our starboard bow, outside the convoy screen, yet close enough for escort response if the sea would only relent. I thumbed the gain and scribbled furiously, then tore the sheet free and sprinted for the bridge. Spray knifed my face the moment I opened the shack door. Deck lights were masked, only the dim glow of the compass hood to steer by. Wind tried to whip the message from my hand. I shielded the paper inside my jacket and clambered up the ladder. The officer of the watch met me at the chart table, face striped by red lamplight. He read, exhaled something that might have been a curse, and slipped the note to the captain. Orders crackled across the voice pipe. Clipped, 1 destroyer detached to investigate, convoy to maintain course and speed. I could almost taste the frustration in those clipped commands. Mariners are bred to aid distress, yet strategy says abandon the unlucky to keep the many alive. Back in the shack, the cabin smelled of ozone and fear. I called the Chatham, urgent, sent a string of V's to cut through static, but her transmitter had fallen silent. Long pause. Only the growl of wind remained. I stared at the silent key a moment, imagining the Radioman on that freighter, maybe still tapping with seawater climbing his ankles. By 3, the barometer bottomed out. Waves hammered our flank with such force that bolts threatened to shear. Every impact threw sparks in the wiring of my skull. The engine telegraph rang. We eased to 8 knots so the convoy could ride the sea without tearing apart. Slower speed meant sweeter aim for torpedoes, somberly. An irony none of us bothered to voice. Sonar pings began. Soft, metallic talks filtering through steel, growing louder as the nearest destroyer swept astern. Each ping echoed down passageways, vibrated soup tins in the galley, pulsed in my ribs like an alien heartbeat. Anxious, listening to that rhythm, you couldn't decide whether to pray it found nothing or something, because confirmation meant action, depth charges, the crew's thin illusion of protection. False negatives left only imagination. At 4:15, a dull boom rolled across the gale, too distant to jolt our hull, yet too deep to be thunder. Men on the bridge froze, straining into darkness. Seconds later, the echo reached my ears through hull plates, a resonant thud, followed by a tremor that rippled deck to mast. Another merchantman, somewhere aft, had just tasted steel. The convoy's column lights blinked in the swirl. One string went abruptly dark. Radio erupted, escorts, barking orders, barking bearings, shadow captains requesting medical supplies, a panic voice override begging coordinates through tears. I copied what I could, handing slips to runners until the pad tore away from its spiral. Through the storm haze, a pale blossom flared on the horizon. Magnesium flare from an escort, or perhaps burning fuel venting skyward. The orange smear on cloud undersides left no doubt. Forward watch reported debris off our bow, hatch covers, crates, a life ring scarred by fire. We altered course 3 points to avoid collision. The helmsman's hands looked bloodless in the glow as he fought the wheel. Sleet iced the window faster than cadets could scrape it clear. A sudden silence fell outside. as if the wind itself paused to listen. Then the sea detonated 40 yards abeam, white geyser, black heart, water and spray climbing mast high. The blast shoved us sideways, plates shrieking, men yelled below, crockery shattering. I tasted diesel fumes blown back through ventilators. Torpedo or near-miss depth charge? The sonar ping that followed suggested friendly explosive, but nerves refused logic. My hands trembled so badly I had to grip the desk to stop them dancing. Through the port, I saw a destroyer knifing across our wake, bow throwing phosphorescent ghosts, depth charges rolling off her stern in deliberate cadence. 1, 2, 3, each blossom of water punctuated by a bass whomp that rattled my teeth. Orange-white flares arced overhead, parachutes blossoming, painting storm clouds like torn velvet. In their sickly light, wreckage became art, hatch beams bobbing, an upended boat, oil-glazing waves with rainbow slicks. Flames licked across that oil where a second freighter bled out cargo tanks. Fire skipping wave crests like tracer chasing the wind. Somewhere in that hell, voices rose, thin, ragged shouts. My earphones slipped. For an instant, the storm outside was louder than the static within, and I heard them without machinery. Men calling across freezing water. The sound lasted only as long as a breath before another wave smothered it. I slammed the door, forced myself back to the set. If there were survivors able to transmit, I wanted to give them an ear. Instead, the circuit filled with German, not speech, but clipped commercial band traffic. Likely U-boat Wolfpack sharing sighting reports. I recognized fragments of call signs the Admiralty had flagged days earlier. They spoke in measured numbers, calm as accountants. It felt obscene hearing that steadiness while men burned half a mile away. I logged the intercept, salted it with curses the sensor would never forward, and passed it up the line. 5:30. The sky had begun to pale behind curtains of sleet, a reluctant hint of dawn. Seas still towered, our bows buried and surfaced in rhythm that left nothing loose standing. The tallest wave so far rode up the starboard side, slapped the bridge windows like a giant's hand, and spilled across the catwalk. Water crashed down hatch combings, hissed against hot plating, steamed into ghostly curtains. Deck crew scrambled in lifelines, slicker gleaming. An hour later, gray light sifting through cloud, the storm slackened just enough for silhouettes to emerge. Blacked out hulls on every quarter, some missing, columns ragged. The freighter 2 ranks port showed her stern down, bow high, still making way, but wounded. Each swell exposed red lead on her plates where paint had scoured away. Across the water, the burning hulk glowed dull orange, smoke shredded by wind. A corvette circled her like a mourning dove, ready to pluck bodies from flame, or finish mercy with shell fire should she turn hazard. Orders crackled, convoy speed reduced further, while escorts combed the gaps. Lifeboats to be searched as daylight improved. I drifted on duty, muscles humming, mind numb. My log showed 36 distinct messages in 4 hours, weather, signals, desperate cries. I could not recall writing half of them. When relief finally stepped in, eyes hollow, I unstrapped the headphones and found my ears still ringing with phantom code. I stumbled onto the open deck, craving air. It tasted of oil smoke, cordite, and cold brine. The sea, though tamed by daylight, rolled heavy swells that lifted our ship like a weary breath. I turned aft and saw floating ruin where a ship had been, jagged ribs protruding, flames licking low, gulls already circling as if they owned the funeral rites. No sound carried from that distance, only the accusing reflection of fire rippling across gunmetal water. Someone touched my arm. The chief engineer, face soot-smudged, pointed starboard. A lifeboat wallowed there, canvas drooping, men huddled inside. They raised exhausted arms as our wake nudged them aside. The captain altered course gently. Deck crew readied lines and scrambling nets. I felt the thrum of engine shift. A subtle change like a question held between teeth. Under that vibration, a deeper note thrummed. The harsh, purposeful clatter of a submarine's twin diesels surfacing somewhere, unseen. Whether real or my imagination stoked by fatigue, I couldn't tell. Yet my pulse answered. Behind me, the sonar ping quickened. Escorts accelerating into new runs. The ocean, restless partner in this dance, offered no clues. As lines shot toward the lifeboat, I jogged back to the shack, afraid to miss whatever came next. Static greeted me like an old sin. I slipped on the headphones and tuned high band again. For a moment, all channels lay silent, hushed as a church before bells. Then, the set erupted with raw hash, an urgent burst I almost missed. Not English this time, but 3 short pulses, a pause, then 2. German hand key, keyed hard. A wolf bragging to the pack, perhaps confirming a kill. I leaned closer, scribbling phonetics, and felt a chill independent of cold. Because even through the distortion, I could hear satisfaction in that fist, a pride only hunters know after they taste blood. I drew a breath, steadied the pencil, and prepared to pass the intercept. In the still pink dawn, with wreckage smoldering and survivors shivering in our lee, the hunt was far from done. The German traffic I copied, 3 clipped bursts, a pause, then a slow, deliberate coda, felt like a shark's grin transmitted through ether. I inked the intercept, wiped sleet-soaked fingers on my trousers, and hustled it to the bridge. The captain studied the cipher groups in silence, thumb stroking his jaw. "One of them's still close," he muttered. He ordered the corvette Hesper to break from screen and chase the bearing I'd derived with the direction finder. Just one slim destroyer type left to comb an ocean thick with shadows, because the rest of our escorts were busy plucking half-frozen men from black water and herding 30-odd freighters that had lost their neat geometry overnight. From the radio shack, I watched Hesper peel away, bow shearing a silver blade in the dull dawn. Her signal lamps winked. One last instruction, maintain station. Then she vanished into pewter haze. Sonar pings already quickening like a heartbeat disappearing down a hallway. Inside our cramped mess, the first survivors were being settled, 10 of them, each wrapped in scratchy gray blankets the Navy swore were wool. Frostbitten hands clutched enamel mugs, trembling too hard to lift. One fellow with a jagged burn across his scalp stared into nothing, while another kept murmuring names under his breath, as though ticking off items in a ledger. I brewed coffee thick enough to stand a spoon and pressed headphones to one ear so I wouldn't miss traffic. The dual world of sound, clanking stoves and despair on one side, electrons hissing eternal rain on the other, made my head feel like a poorly tuned antenna. At 0900 the seas eased to a long glassy heave. The storm had blown itself down to ragged gusts that whistled more than roared. With daylight, we tallied fresh scars. Plates buckled the long number 2 hold, rail stanchions sheared, a locker-sized dent where a floating hatch cover had kissed the hull. Above all, the smell of burned bunker fuel carried miles, sticking to your tongue no matter how many times you spat over the side. Hesper's hunt played out in our ears more than our eyes. I kept her circuit on monitor, volume low, contacts, bearings, attack runs, each message terse, stripped of adjectives, like entries in a grim diary. At 10:34 she dropped pattern Alpha. At 10:41, pattern Charlie. The depth charge concussions reached us as faint bass notes, a delayed rumble through water and air. Every time the survivors on our mess deck flinched, as though remembering the first blast that tore them from bunks. None of us said the obvious. If Hesper found her quarry, one more column of bubbles would rise to the slate surface, and inside that iron coffin, another Radioman would send no more boasts. By noon, the sea burned with sudden sunlight, rare North Atlantic apology, turning spray into prisms and lifting spirits a hair. Our carpenter jury-rigged a patch on the dent, gun crews chipped ice from shields. I slipped to the boat deck, where rescued men huddled, listening to a bosun spinning a yarn about peacetime New Orleans. When a lull came, I offered the Radioman from the sunk freighter a cigarette. His lips quivered, trying to hold it steady while I cupped the match. He finally managed, raspy, a rasp of gratitude, and asked whether the convoy would detach for Halifax or head clear to New York. I told him we still aimed for Halifax, so long as no wolves eat the tail again tonight. We shared a hollow chuckle that tasted of smoke and salt. Shortly after 1500, Hesper signaled. Negative oil slick, negative debris, assumed contact slipped below thermal layer, orders to rejoin. Her silhouette reappeared 2 hours later, knifing across sun-shot swells, proud but empty-handed. One lone destroyer cannot cage every ghost. Smoke from funeral pyres streaked the horizon when dusk returned, painting sky and water the color of dried blood. We buried 3 of the rescued who hadn't lasted the day. 1 shrapnel, 2 exposure. And the chaplain's words got carried off on wind before they reached the rail. The canvas-shrouded bodies slid away with hardly a splash. As the last amen faded, sonar pings started up again, steady, searching, impatient. Night fell fast. The convoy resumed blackout, each ship a moving absence. Rain returned, softer now, drumming tarps like anxious fingertips. I took the 2400 watch. The shack smelled of damp wool and hot circuitry. Static had that brittle winter edge, full of northern aurora crackle. Somewhere beyond the hiss, a single-letter call, German short code used for homing, ticked faintly. I swung the loop antenna, the bearing lined up, not with starboard horizon this time, but dead ahead, inside our own perimeter. I called the bridge. The captain arrived in moments, face a wan smear in red light. We ran a quick triangulation with the corvette set, 2 bearings crossing, uncomfortably close, barely 5 miles out. maybe between columns 1 and 2. Could be a stray signal from an Allied escort, but every instinct prickled. The captain ordered immediate star shell from the nearest destroyer. Green magnesium burst open above us, harsh daylight dropping out of black sky. For 10 blazing seconds, the ocean flashed emerald, freighters casting warped shadows across heaving ridges. Nothing broke surface, but every deck gun swung outward. Crews crouched behind shields, fingers white on triggers. Then the flare guttered, night slammed back, and the convoy lay blind again. Moments later, hydrophones reported screws, slow, deliberate, fading astern. The Wolf had slunk through our sheep unnoticed, perhaps stalking the lame freighter we'd left smoking in rear station. Escorts hammered toward the Echo, depth charges tossing water spouts skyward, thunder reverberating inside my lungs. The survivors on board clenched railings, some weeping, some praying, all remembering. From the shack, I logged every detonation's timestamp. Between patterns, a chilling quiet settled, broken only by sleet ticking the port and the subdued hum of our dynamos. Then, a new burst of German Morse erupted, longer, agitated. I grabbed my pad, copying blind. Grossfish beschädigt, position falked. Big fish damaged, position to follow. He was reporting success, or at least a hit. I felt bile rise, knowing that message would summon more wolves. I passed the intercept. The Commodore ordered evasive zigzag for the whole convoy. Engines stepped up. Our deck shuddered, bow beginning its sawtooth dance across swells. In darkness, each turn felt like groping across a minefield. Freighters loomed, then disappeared. Sometimes so near, I could see rivets glint in starlight before they faded. One slip in timing, and we'd collide ourselves into ruin. Midnight broached. My eyes ached from staring at red lamps and rain-smeared gauges. Somewhere, deep below, boilers groaned like tired beasts. I caught myself drifting, mind replaying that bragging German phrase. Then, a distant flare bloomed, this time white, somewhere on our port quarter. The intercom crackled, "Survivor boat sighted. Another wreck's orphans adrift in the blind night. Orders. Escorts maintain hunt while our freighter and a tanker nearest the boat slow to pick up." My heartbeat quickened. Reducing speed made us plump targets, but leaving people in that water felt worse. I checked antenna insulators, tightened the life jacket cinch across my chest. Superstition maybe, but the North Atlantic respects no man who stands unprepared. As we eased off the throttle, the sea sounded louder. A cavernous rush past the hull. Searchlights pierced rain in narrow blades, catching a lifeboat stark against black. Figures waved feebly. The match-flame eyes of their paraffin lantern reflected terror and hope in equal parts. Deckhands shouted, lines arced, the bow thruster thrummed to hold us steady. I listened to sonar chatter in one ear, deck orders in the other, brain-juggling horrors. A destroyer's code came through. Contact regained, commencing Hedgehog. 20 seconds later, a series of sharper cracks, Hedgehog bombs detonating only on impact, rumbled through the hull. I imagined Hesper's hydrophone operators counting each splash, waiting for that telltale blossom of bubbles that meant a submarine had become a tomb. Crew heaved the lifeboat alongside. Pale figures, 8 this time, 2 clearly dead, were hauled aboard. One conscious seaman tried to salute the captain, hand frozen in half arc before it dropped. Medics ferried them below. I caught a glimpse of one woman, a naval nurse by her torn white sleeve, her hair stiff with salt, eyes swollen but alert. She mouthed a thank you, whispering. I felt rather than heard as they hurried her past. Engines meshed back to convoy speed. I watched the rescued boat drift away, then capsize as a wave flipped it like a toy. Wood splintered, canvas fluttered once, and the Atlantic consumed more evidence. Inside, warmth felt sinful. I resumed my seat, fingers hovering over the key. The clock read 0023. My next log line remained blank, pen waiting. Outside, escorts still hammered away, star shells popping intermittent green over the horizon, each brief bloom revealing jagged spires of spray and smoke. Somewhere beyond those flashes, a damaged U-boat bled hope or plotted revenge. I couldn't guess which. Static thickened, pregnant with messages yet unborn. I drew a breath, leaned closer to the receiver, and whispered to the dark wires, "Come on then, you bastard. Let's hear what's next." The headphones answered with a rising whine. No words yet, only the promise that the night of suspense had many hours left to spend. Something changed in the water around 0130. So subtle, I felt it before I heard it. The deck's tremor shifted pitch, as though the swells themselves were drawing a slower breath. Through the port, the sky flashed, green then violet, star shells raining from Hesper's rails. The blasts came next, a string of muffled coughs under the bones, hedgehog bombs sinking like cast iron prayers. Each one detonated only on contact, so the first seconds were a cruel silence, until the ocean belched a single deep-throated whump. Air in the shack compressed, gauges rattled. For an instant the receiver went dead, as if the ether itself flinched. Then nothing. No echo, no follow-up. The destroyer's sonar fell strangely quiet. I strained for reports but heard only rain scratching the roofing tar and my own pulse banging in my ears. 5 minutes later, Hesper signaled, reporting, calm, large airburst, possible detonation of enemy torpedo warhead, continuing sweep. No triumphant language, just the guarded diction of men who'd seen wreckage vanish before proof could be hauled to daylight. Still, hope seeped in like warmth from a galley vent. While the escorts tightened their pattern, I used the lull to check on the newcomers in sickbay. The nurse we'd pulled from the capsized boat sat propped against a bulkhead, cheeks blotched crimson from windburn. Chief Steward Morales spooned broth between her cracked lips. She caught my eye, managed a brittle smile, and asked weakly whether the Radioman had any music. I offered matter-of-factly the hum of Transformer, best I could do at sea. Her laugh, more a rasp, turned into a cough that shook her whole frame. We had no spare bunks, so hammocks sprouted wherever hooks would take a lashing. Survivors hung in a forest of swaying cloth, ankles and elbows bumping with each roll. One shriveled deckhand sobbed quietly, convinced the U-boat's captain had posted his soul on a tally board. I wanted to tell him that hunters rarely remembered the names of prey, but words jammed in my throat. Instead, I helped the medic tighten a splint, then returned to my kingdom of static. 2:30, the convoy resumed 14-knot zigzags. Spray hammered the shack like snowballs of broken glass. I copied a weather front advisory. Southerly gale expected by dawn. Grimace, half smile. Another cloak for killers. Another chance for us to slip unseen. The loudspeaker crackled. All hands not on watch, stand by to assist rescue operations. A line of Morse had slipped through, reporting bodies on wreckage 3 cables off our starboard quarter. Up on deck, the scene belonged to nightmares. Searchlights combed black water in jerky arcs, revealing oil-slick waves and splinters the size of church pews. Our deck crew rigged Jacob's ladders. Gunners, relieved from stations, leaned over rail with boat hooks. We inched closer, engines feathering, hull shuddering with each cautious burst ahead. I heard agonized cries again, thin, wind-shredded. A patch of wreckage drifted into the beam. Half a lifeboat keel up, 3 men clinging like barnacles. One slipped, vanished before the hook reached him. The other 2 came aboard stiff as driftwood. Their hands bled where frost had bitten away nails. Their eyes held nothing but dull obedience. The nurse insisted on helping, despite her own bandages. She knelt by each new arrival, softly whispering the same words in a cadence I couldn't quite catch over wind. Maybe fragments of a hymn. Maybe only their names repeated so someone would know they'd existed. Hearing that, my throat thickened more than any depth charge crash could manage. At 0347, Hesper reported screw noise fading east and claimed a probable kill based on gas eruptions and debris. No oil slick, though. U-boats bled lightly, like needle wounds. The Commodore accepted the tentative victory and turned escorts back to cover flanks. Still, I noticed the sonar watch doubled, and magazines were restocked from ready lockers. Thoughtful. Hope is a luxury, vigilance the rent for staying alive. Dawn arrived as an anemic band of pewter smearing the eastern fringe. Sleety drizzle hissed off hot steam pipes, raising a ghostly veil above the deck. The sea settled to a sullen roll, no gentleness, only less anger. Through binoculars I counted hulls, 32 now, down from 37 2 days earlier. Somber. Column gaps yawned like missing teeth. We didn't dwell. Superstition forbade counting ghosts before landfall, but every man's eyes lingered on those empty places longer than intended. With daylight, the air patrol reached us, 2 Hudson bombers droning low, condensation plumes trailing like leashes. Their presence drew cheers from gun crews and a ragged salute from one rescued sailor who might have been waving at angels. Relieved. Via VHF, they reported clear scopes for 50 miles and promised relief destroyers by noon. Hopeful. The sky seemed to brighten a shade, as though simply knowing someone else was watching made the ocean behave. The nurse found me outside the shack, leaning on a rail icy enough to peel skin. She asked if I'd radioed her ship's owners. Resigned, I admitted no call had come through from the city of Bidford, not even an SOS. She may have been hit so fast, no key was touched. Her jaw clenched once, then she reached into a pocket and pressed something into my palm. A brass pendant shaped like a swallow, its wings blunted by salt. Softly. "For luck," she said. Gentle. "Keep it near the set. Birds know their way home." I might have laughed at talismans from a sea littered with amulets, but the token felt warm despite the cold. I slipped it beside the frequency dial where sunlight, what little there was, could glint off tarnished copper. Superstition joins discipline as twin engines of endurance. Late morning, cloud ceilings lifted enough to reveal the long warp of gray horizon and, on it, a faint smudge, the destroyer Warwick, and 2 smaller trawlers racing to relieve exhausted escorts. Sirens whooped across the convoy. Crews waved helmets, some whistled. Hesper peeled off toward base, her paint scarred and depth charge racks empty, signal flags snapping, a jaunty farewell. I tapped a quick, safe voyage in Morse. Her operator sent back 3 brisk dits, understood, and was gone in spray. Relief ships brought mail bags and medical stores slung over jackstays, plus a fresh officer to brief us on route changes. U-boats, he said, were massing further west, Wolfpack name Burgund, maybe 15 strong. Allied command ordered a northern dogleg to skirt known patrol lines. The detour would tack an extra day onto passage, but offered the promise of thicker air coverage. Groans rippled through mess decks. Men counted cigarettes and socks, recalculated how many dawns they'd need to survive. During the handover lull, I squeezed in a catnap, eyelids raw from sand grit fatigue. I dreamt of coded messages drifting like jellyfish, glowing in dark water, tangling in propellers. When the runner shook me awake, it was nearly 1400, and the sky had darkened again. Storm front skirting our dogleg, rain scribbling slanted lines across steel.
The afternoon passed in staccato tasks. Calibrate transmitter crystals, translate Admiralty updates, log a dozen weather bulletins. I kept half an ear on distress wavelengths. Silence can be mercy, or the pause before a hammer. Somewhere abeam, the tanker still limped from torpedo damage, bulkheads groaning with each crest, but she stayed afloat by stubborn will and a patchwork of collision mats. I overheard her captain decline an escort to Iceland. Determined. "She'll make Halifax or crack her back trying," he said. That brand of defiance smelled like cordite, reckless, irresistible. At 1700, sonar snagged a faint contact, 60 degrees off port bow, depth uncertain. Escorts converged. Hudsons pounced, dropping depth charges that boomed like doors slamming shut. Oil traces surfaced, thin iridescence swirling in rain, but no wreckage. Probable miss, or another cripple slipping under thermocline. Still, the kill zone pushed wolves back, and we used the gap to widen convoy lanes, each ship breathing easier for the extra cable's width. Evening meal was stewed salt pork, navy bread as hard as a bosun's conscience, and tea so strong it could polish brass. Survivors sat with crew now, the invisible border between us and them erased by shared calamity. Comedy flickered. The chief explained the finer points of scuppers to a merchant stoker who'd never stood on a deck that high above water. Laughter sprung with the brittle sound of something unfrozen. Night settled gentler than the one before, wind moderate, seas obedient. We ran without running lights, but anxiety felt diffused, like smoke after rain. The nurse visited the shack bearing a mug of real cocoa scrounged from the purser. She asked what drove me to radio work. I answered truthfully. A childhood stutter. Thoughtful. Morse let me speak without tripping over my tongue. She touched the headphones in silent respect, then left me to static and the swallow talisman glinting beside the dial. After midnight, clouds shredded to reveal stars sharp enough to pierce thought. I stepped onto the wing deck, headset cord snaking through the doorway, and listened to convoys whisper, dots and dashes twinkling like their celestial cousins. Somewhere below, perhaps a crippled U-boat nursed wounds, batteries drained, hoping to crawl back to Brest. Our escorts patrolled in widening spirals, exclamation points in search of a sentence. At 0245, a final contact report came. Sonar bearing steady, but receding. Screws at low RPM. Whether damaged or merely discouraged, The predator was moving off. The Commodore relayed a single word across the columns: resume, and engines throttled to cruising speed. Water hissed under bows in a confidence we hadn't heard since leaving port. I logged the hour, tipped the Swallow pendant once for luck, and let myself imagine the scent of spruce that would greet us downwind of Halifax. The U-boats had not gone extinct, only withdrawn, yet for the first time in days, the horizon felt wider than the threat hiding beneath it. Above, Orion strode unblinking, and I allowed the naive notion that his belt pointed toward home. Behind me, the receiver muttered faint weather code, ordinary and almost benevolent. I closed my eyes, letting cold air sting away the grit. The ocean, somber accomplice to both hunter and hunted, murmured under the hull, but kept its secrets for now. And somewhere in the wake, drifting among shattered planks and extinguished flares, the night released the last of its terrified voices into silence, leaving only the hum of diesel and the quiet resolve of men who, against all sensible odds, were still afloat and headed west.
The ocean wore a softer face by dawn, as though ashamed of last night's cruelties. Swells still rolled, but with a languid grace that let the freighters breathe between heartbeats. The air smelled of salt, untainted by smoke, for the first time in days. And I lingered in the shack doorway, watching cold sunlight stir flecks of mica in the gray water. Engines drummed the familiar steady 4-4, no frantic zigzag orders, no star shells clawing daylight from the dark. North America lay somewhere over that rim of horizon, a fact almost too generous to trust. Routine reasserted itself like muscle memory. I copied the morning Admiralty list, call signs crisp, fleet numbers mercifully unchanged since midnight. The swallow charm winked beside the dial. I tapped a discreet acknowledgement. An old superstitious habit. 3 quick dits, too rapid for the log. My private signal that luck and discipline were on speaking terms again. Outside, a lone gull wheeled low over the convoy, complaining in the language of harbors. Even that tinny cry felt like a promise. At 0900, the lookout sang the words we'd nearly forgotten were possible. Land cloud ahead. Not land proper, just that faint discoloration in sky and water when coasts hide someplace beyond curvature. But it set mess decks buzzing. By 10, we had positive bearings from Sambro Lightship, and VHF chatter bloomed as inbound corvettes relayed harbor traffic instructions. I passed position reports to the bridge, each one a breadcrumb on the trail home. The captain acknowledged with a nod that looked suspiciously like relief. Freighters loosened formation, lengthening columns into skeins. Escorts pressed outward to screen the last miles, hulls throwing foam like racehorses smelling the barn. Somewhere aft, the damaged tanker still listed, but a tug dispatched from Halifax had her in gentle tow. That mismatched pair lagged a horizon behind. Yet the sight of a tugboat's plume, stubby, determined, sparked a cheer louder than any depth charge blast. Survivors who could stand came topside. wrapped in coats too large. They lined rails, faces chalky, eyes scanning for the first dark notch of shoreline. The nurse stood among them, one arm in a sling now, wind teasing hair free of makeshift pins. When the lighthouse tower finally breached the haze, a pale tooth on the starboard bow, she let out a laugh so raw it startled the deckhands coiling lines nearby. I pretended to fuss with antenna couplings, giving her whatever privacy joy can claim at sea. Static evolved into traffic, harbor pilots assigning berths, tugs bartering for tow priority, a Canadian frigate reporting minesweeper lanes clear since dawn. The ether smelled of civilization. Paperwork, predictable squabbles, clocks that ran on dockmaster time instead of survival rhythm. My fists unclenched before I noticed. Around noon, we crossed into the approaches. The sea shifted color, a slate green tinted by river silt, and cold air carried whiffs of fir trees from the Nova Scotia interior. Snowcaps gleamed on distant hills like freshly laundered linens. I logged final sea position, stowed the cipher books, and reset the receiver to harbor channels. Protocol requires composure in that moment. Yet my hands trembled worse than the first night out. Not fear now, but the body releasing everything it held too tight. Tugs nosed alongside, stubby bows bumping our plates with affectionate thuds. Their whistles sounded ridiculous after U-boat klaxons, comic relief horns in a tragic opera. Deck crews tossed heaving lines, slapping, heavy hemp slapped wet deck, deckhands made fast. The freighter eased under tug guidance, engines rumbling, engines replying in gentle spurts. From shore, gulls screamed at the sudden banquet of harbor scum. Dock cranes waited in patient ranks, booms pointing skyward like cathedral spires. We crept past George's Island, its fort's guns black against snow. A ferry, civilians bundled on deck, paused mid-channel so the convoy remnants could parade by. Some passengers waved, unaware 15 souls in the lifeboats slung aft had seen their ships disintegrate less than 48 hours earlier. Thoughtful. I wondered if later, in warm kitchens, those ferry riders would mention the gaunt faces passing under their gaze, or if peacetime habits would edit such strangeness away. Lines went ashore, bumping. Timber pilings bumped hull steel. Someone dropped the first gangway plank with a clanging clang that felt like punctuation on a long sentence. Boilers sighed down, winches clattering. Deck winches clattered idle, a hushed hush spread, broken only by orders echoing fore to aft. I removed the headphones, for once no urgency tugged at the cord, and listened to silence that wasn't silence at all. Gulls screeching, distant train rumbling, rail cars, a harmonica playing. Harmonica from some landside bar. Civilization's messy symphony. Dockside officials boarded, tally sheets in triplicate. Medics guided survivors across planks to ambulances. Thumping, boots thumping planks in uneven cadence. One stoker paused halfway and reached back to touch rusted steel, as if the hull itself deserved thanks. Solemn. The nurse followed, swallow pendant briefly catching sun as she adjusted her sling. She pressed 2 fingers to her brow, half salute, half farewell, then disappeared into a crowd of whites and khakis. Customs men in wool greatcoats inspected cargo manifests, but their eyes kept sliding to the scorched paint, the dented rail, the missing lifeboat davit. Paperwork faltered in the presence of story. The first mate showed them where shrapnel had stitched through bulkhead 3. A stevedore whistled low, pencil hanging uncertain over his ledger. After formalities, the crew stood at ease along the port catwalk. The captain addressed us without a podium, just a man among men, voice low enough that gulls didn't bother pausing their squabbles. He read the convoy losses. 5 ships vanished, 87 souls unaccounted for, 24 rescued by our decks, another dozen dispersed among escorts. Long pause. A moment of silence followed, but harbor machines clanged on, and perhaps that was right. The living cannot freeze time. They can only choose to carry the weight forward. Early evening found me in the wireless office ashore, sending final reports. Arrival time, survivor count, intercept copies. The clerk on duty slid hot coffee across the counter, black as Radioman humor. Softly, he asked how bad it had been out there. I answered with a shrug that felt like lying. Words can't render sleet that slices skin, or the stench of burning bunker oil trapped in your hair for days. They certainly can't translate the hush after a depth charge when everyone waits to learn which world, ours or theirs, has lost another heartbeat. Night inked the harbor, lamps reflecting in oil-slick calms between piers. I stood alone on the brow, breathing timber, diesel, cold brine. Shore leave chits flapped in my pocket, but fatigue glued soles to deck. The swallow pendant rested beside the receiver still, inside the dark shack behind me, and I wondered whether to keep it or find the nurse and hand it back before trains scattered people to continents. Thoughtful. I decided on morning. Promises feel sturdier in daylight. Some of the crew lit candles aft, improvised vigil near the dented hatch combing. Names were spoken. The ordinary seamen swept off the winch when the torpedo hit. The bosun's mate who dove for a lifeline and surfaced under flames. A steward everyone simply called Pops. They poured a tot of rum into the harbor, drops vanishing into black mirror. I joined, offered no words, the candle flame dancing in my cupped hands, reminding me of star shells, only gentler. Eventually, fatigue trumped sentiment. I secured the shack, dogged the door, and descended to my berth. The mattress felt suspect, too soft, too stable. I missed the engine's heartbeat already. Sleep came, but not quietly. I dreamt Morse again, letters forming faces I knew, then dissolving like phosphorescence when water is stirred. Somewhere in the dream, a U-boat crew assembled on a pier exactly opposite ours, honoring their own dead with the same whispered names. Dawn bled pale over Halifax. gulls stitching crooked circles above fish houses. I found the nurse at the Red Cross canteen, hands encircling a chipped teacup. I placed the swallow on the table. She pushed it back, gently. "It's flown to you now," and smiled the first true smile I'd seen since before the storm. Outside, a freight train hooted, departing rounds. She rose to board a hospital coach bound inland. We shook hands, her fingers still cold but steadier, and exchanged no more talismans. The swallow sat warm against my palm as I watched her disappear behind frosted windows. Discharge papers would take a week, cargo unloading longer with winter labor shortages. A shore posting might tempt some men, but I knew I'd sign on for the eastbound leg the moment the charter appeared. The ocean is a terrible listener. Yet I craved its unfiltered honesty. Storms don't pretend. Torpedoes don't negotiate. On land, everyone talks like static, and I needed the clean discipline of dots and dashes to tell me what mattered. I returned to the ship just as harbor whistles blew noon, the city shrugging into another workday. In the radio shack, sunlight shafted through a porthole, catching dust motes drifting like survivors of some small, silent wreck. I powered the set, let tubes warm, and tuned to the Admiralty schedule. The swallow pendant leaned against the dial, wings tarnished but unbroken. I touched the key, sent a test. GKOTD Halifax. QRV. Ready for orders? Static answered. Then a crisp hand keyed back acknowledgement. Routine, but reassuring. I logged the exchange, looked out at cranes lifting the first crate from number 2 hold, and felt engines in my chest, though they were cold metal below. Soon enough, they'd turn again. Outside, snow flurries spiraled like loose confetti, dissolving on deck plates still warm from sun. The harbor smelled of pine and coal smoke, of endings and beginnings overlapping without seam. I picked up a fresh pad, dated the top corner boldly. January 1943 still, though the month felt years wide, and wrote the opening line. Departing Halifax. Skies overcast. Crew outwardly calm. Habit or prayer, it didn't matter. In this job, the story never ends. It only changes frequency. I filed the last routine report at the Naval office, stamped and initialed by a lieutenant no older than the ink still drying on his collar tabs, and stepped back onto the wharf feeling impossibly light. Then absurdly untethered. Land has no give beneath your boots, no surge or slide to argue balance. I kept waiting for the ground to fall away in the space between heartbeats, the way a deck lifts and sinks even though logic promised it would not. 2 pigeons, quarreling over breadcrumb spoils, startled me more than any shell burst had. Their wings cracked the air like flags in Gale, and reminded me I was homeward of nowhere in particular. The company assigned us a temporary dormitory, an old brick custom shed converted into bunks with straw mattresses that smelled of molasses. Crewmates scattered, some to the seaman's mission for letters, others to taverns blinking warm ember through frosted windows. I pocketed my pay chit, unread, and followed the nurse's directions to the Royal Naval Hospital to hand-deliver a packet of code sheets her radioman had kept dry even as seawater climbed his knees. Admiralty wanted the ledger for post-mortem analysis. She met me in a corridor lined with iodine scent and low murmurs. Her sling traded for a fresh bandage. When I offered the packet, she asked if I'd stay to read telegrams with the wounded. I almost said no. My own tank felt bone dry. But her eyes held the specific fatigue of someone still treading water in dreams she wouldn't confess. So I stayed. We read notices aloud to men whose sight had gone fuzzy from concussion or oil burns. Parental reliefs, sweethearts' promises. One firm but kindly rejection. Better he learn before shipping east again, the matron whispered. Every message, even the cruel one, felt like a line tossed across an ocean still inside them. I watched fingers twitch against sheets as words traveled in and stitch split spirits closed, an inch at a time.
Late that evening, the Port Authority convened an informal board in a drafty conference room above the chandlery. Representatives from each surviving ship sat around a scarred oak table under a single buzzing bulb, while steam pipes clanged like muffled depth charges. We tallied losses, column by column, hulls gone, tonnage sunk, cargo value, number of lifeboats recovered. My part was the communications log. I slid carbon copies across the wood, pages marked with greasy fingerprints and salt stains where sleet had soaked through. A Canadian commander lifted one sheet gently. 0033, SOS received, signal lost, and cleared his throat before continuing. Bureaucracy needs decimals and signatures. The sea trades in silences and voids. Somewhere between, we tried to convert absence into ledger entries. Totals settled cruelly neat. 5 freighters lost, 1 tanker crippled, 92 crew presumed dead, 20 survived wounds likely to end seafaring careers, blind eyes, shattered knees, lungs scorched by bunker fumes. The commander signed the bottom line, then folded the log as if it were just another invoice. Only when he thought nobody watched did he press a palm flat on the cover, a tacit benediction. The harbor church held memorial service 2 nights later. Snow spun past stained glass windows, melting to rivulets that traced saints' robes. Bells tolled, not languid Sunday tones, but single, heavy notes, each one measured like the interval between sonar pings. I sat near the back, collar newly starched, hands anxious in lap. The captain read a psalm, voice steady until he reached the name of our young oiler who'd vanished under burning spray. Then his breath catches breath snagged. A momentary static burst, and the chaplain leaned forward to finish the verse. Candles flickered down the nave, their flames bent whenever a door opened to admit more mourners, letting in gusts smelling of coal smoke and sea. Survivors from other ships crowded pews, sleeves pinned where arms no longer were, medals already tarnishing on borrowed jackets. A choir of dockworkers' children sang, "Abide with me," thin, pure treble that shouldn't belong to war at all. Tears found seams I'd caulked tight. I let them, eyes on the lacquered pew, ahead until wood blurred into wave lines. After service, we gathered on the pier under arc lamps that fizzed in falling snow. The harbor tug that had shepherded the crippled tanker berthed nearby, whistle droning a soft lament. Wreaths, pine boughs wired with red ribbon, were passed hand to hand. We laid them on the icy water. Current tugged the green circles outward, rotating them like compass roses as they drifted toward open sea. Flurries settled on needles, bright as Morse dots, before melting into the dark. The nurse stood beside me, sling gone, arm stiff but unhidden.
She whispered that rituals felt inadequate.
Yet absence without ritual was worse. I agreed. Words came easier ashore, though they still felt secondhand. She asked what next for me. Back east, I said, voice cracking despite resolve. I saw her jaw tighten in the same yes, but no expression sailors wear when shore leave ends. She squeezed my elbow once in farewell and turned toward the hospital launch.
The following morning, our ship shifted to dry berth for hull survey. Ship fitters hammered plates, rivets pinging like type bars on giant, unseen keys. I hoisted aerial sections, inspected insulators, paid out fresh lead-in. There's comfort in metronomic labor. At midday, a messenger delivered orders. Convoy HX 224, scheduled within the week. Our freighter reassigned to column 2. I tucked the envelope into a radio manual. The paper felt as inevitable as tide tables. That night, after the yard siren dismissed day laborers, I climbed to the highest catwalk above number 3 hold, swallow pendant in pocket. The harbor shimmered with ice floes grinding against pilings, stars hard and cold overhead. I tapped the rail once in idle habit, dash, dot, dash, dot, the opening of our call sign. The metal responded with dull resonance. Somewhere beyond shorelights, the Atlantic waited, slate and patient. I thought of the men we listed on that oak table, names reduced to numbers. I thought of the German radioman whose cool clipped fist announced a victory he might not have lived to boast over breakfast. 2 mirrors facing each other across dark water, each reflecting loss in endless recursion. The arithmetic of war never balances, it only compounds. Snow began again, fine as coal dust. I felt its sting on cheeks, watched it vanish against heated rivets. For a heartbeat I pictured refusing orders, signing off for a land job, mending radios in dry offices. But the image wavered. Behind it I heard the hush of the ether, that vast, indifferent choir where every call, friend, foe, or frightened stranger, deserved an answering ear. The ocean's grammar had become my own. Leaving it mid-sentence felt like betrayal. Below, the chief engineer emerged, face lantern-lit, beckoning for evening tea. I descended ladders slick with frost. Steam curled from galley vents, mingling with coal scent drifting from yard locomotives coupling cargo. Inside, warmth took my bones by surprise. Mugs clinked. Someone strummed banjo strings rescued from a wrecked trunk. Laughter came hesitantly, as though testing structural integrity, then settled into steady timber.
I excused myself early, stepping into the radio shack to finish calibrations. Tubes glowed sanguine within metal cages, faint hum like a heartbeat you could tune. The swallow pendant leaned where I'd left it. I hooked the chain over a bolt head so wings faced forward, toward whatever longitude awaited. Paperwork lay ready. Blank logbook, fresh carbons, one corner already creased where a nervous thumb had worried it. At 2300, I keyed the daily test transmission, call signs snapping through night. Halifax Coast Station answered, steady and familiar, a lighthouse in code. Procedures concluded, I lingered, fingers resting on the key. I thought of the candlelight dance on harbor waves, of pigeons' startled wings, of children's treble voices. I thought of voices swallowed by storm who would never hear shore bells again. Then I tapped 3 discreet dits, the private salute I'd adopted from the nurse's gift, and closed down the set. Snow thickened outside, muffling shipyard clatter, muting the city to a hush reminiscent of mid-ocean nights when only diesel and heartbeats counted seconds. I lay in my bunk later, engines still cold beneath, but phantom vibrations already lulling muscles. In that in-between of wakefulness, I rehearsed the sound of our horn echoing down the harbor, the slow pivot of tugs, the Swallow's imagined flight path overhead. And in that half-dream, I heard once more the faintest whisper through static, a distant radioman sending nothing but the simple, stubborn fact of existence. D, D, D. I answered in the only language either of us had left. My breathing slowed to the cadence of Morse. Dot, space, dot, until sleep keyed the rest. Cold February dawn slid its thin blade between the ship and the wharf, scraping sleep from every rivet. I stood on the after well deck with a mug that tasted more of rust than coffee, watching dockhands pull off the last shore power leads. Frost glazed the mooring lines, each rope twanged when it hit the bit, an ice-strung harp announcing our second act. Orders pinned to the notice board named us GKOT again. Same call sign, same hull, yet the crew felt half new. Replacements arrived overnight. A kid from Boston who still smelled of boot camp, a fireman with knuckles like bent rebar, 2 gunners wearing fresh sergeant stripes nobody had saluted yet. They shuffled along the rail, staring at the water the way green hands always do, trying to see sharks beneath sheet ice. The yard tug's whistle coughed and we answered with ours. 3 short blasts, permission to leave. Engines came ahead at idle. I felt them in my marrow, that steady drum I'd missed ashore. As we eased clear of the slip, gulls abandoned their lamppost thrones and wheeled overhead, scolding us for stirring their breakfast tide. Snow flurries whirled in our prop wash, spinning like ash from a cold fire. I ducked into the shack, stowed my sea bag under the bench, and re-inventoried everything the survey gangs had handled. Coils of antenna wire, crystal boxes, the Red Book cipher pouch, still sealed with white lead. Tubes hummed faintly, orange eyes blinking ready. The swallow talisman hung where I'd left it, wings pointing east, direction of return, direction of risk. I tapped the key twice, not transmitting, just feeling its give, like flexing a joint expected to carry weight again. We cleared the harbor boom before sunrise. Convoy HX-224 assembled off Chebucto Head, 28 ships this time, fewer than last run but laden deeper. Deck edges rode barely 8 feet above water, cold brine licking paint where a careless boot could slip. Escorts gathered. A brace of Flower-class corvettes and a new Captain-class frigate fresh from Boston, her radar aerials slick as cat whiskers. They cut aggressive silhouettes, a promise, if not a guarantee. Ice floes drifted between hulls, crunching under sharp bows. Somewhere ahead, a bosun's pipe whistled sail stations. Canvas hatch covers rasped taut. The captain appeared at my elbow, eyes on the horizon where a low bruise of cloud hinted rough weather. "Admiralty says Pack Hammer prowls the Grand Banks," he said, voice just above the wind. Submarines transferred down from Norway, better gear, hungrier crews. He didn't have to add that Hammer hadn't lost a boat in months. I nodded, wrote the name on the margin of my pad, underlined it twice. By noon, we were hull down from land, pointing at the longitude where charts start to look empty. The Boston kid, McCready, still wearing his recruiting depot wool, wandered into the shack clutching a sandwich. He stared at the receiver like it might bite. I showed him the watch log, the frequency board, the battered mug that doubled as ashtray. He asked whether Morse ever got easier to hear inside a Gale. "The letters don't change," I said, "only the noise around them." He grinned, not sure if it was joke or lesson. Late watch brought the first whiff of trouble. The barometer lost 3 millibars in 1 hour, needles dipping faster than coffee in the mess. Weather reports backed it up. Polar low sagging south, gale warning violet for our track. A storm meant 2 things, creaking plates and poor air cover, both gifts to U-boats. Thoughtful. I copied the bulletin, sent acknowledgement, felt the deck cant as we began the prescribed zigzag pattern. 8 degrees port, hold 7 minutes. 8 degrees starboard, hold 6. Every turn slid coffee in the mug and slid nerves in the belly. Dusk wrapped the convoy in iron-gray cloth. Columns tightened. Escort lamps winked coded comfort before blacking out entirely. Tense, I logged each position report, flipping pages so fast edges burned my fingertips. Static thickened with auroral hiss, voices warping mid-word. Somewhere inside that blizzard, a faint German letter, long dash, ... surfaced and sank. Thoughtful. I spun the loop, bearing uncertain, somewhere off the starboard quarter. I marked it on the chart in pencil, showed the watch officer. He stared longer than necessary, said we'd pass it up when a second bearing confirmed. Snow turned to sleet. Pellets pinged the shack roof, ricocheting like spent shot. A sudden lurch sent McCready sprawling, sandwich sacrificed to the deck plates. Casual. Initiation, I told him, helping him up while sleet drummed approval overhead. 2,300 hours, the storm's front arrived not with thunder, but with a deadening of horizon. No line between sea and sky, only a moving wall of slate. Ominous. Wind howled through jackstays, cleats groaned. Somewhere forward, a loose hatch cover slammed until a bosun's mate braved spray to dog it down. Intense. I wiped the port glass, nothing to see but spume. Then, the set bark, alive. Distress channel, but clipped, nearly stepped on by static. Urgent. CQ des CTKR. Engine failure. Position 50 north, 45 west. Request escort. A straggler, 30 miles astern, alone in building C's. I acknowledged, passed the slip to the bridge. An escort peeled out, stern wash glowing phosphorescent green. 30 miles felt like half the ocean in weather like this. McCready took the phones while I wolfed cold stew. When I returned, he had a grin plastered under headphones. "Think I caught another wolf," he said, pointing at a scratch line on the bearing board. Same quadrant as earlier, stronger this time. We plotted cross bearings from the frigate's HFDF. Intersection landed inside our convoy spread like a dropped pin. I rang the alarm, 3 sharp clanks on the brass. A code every man understood. Unseen company. Escorts altered stations. Azdic pings blossoming through holes in overlapping waves. Each ping returned with that hollow church bell timbre that means the sea is dark but empty, yet instincts screamed otherwise. I hovered over the key, ready to relay contact. Sleet blurred into freezing rain, rattling in crescendos as if some giant poured gravel over the shack. Midnight passed beneath that racket. The U-boat, if one truly lay among us, kept silent, patient as frost. I imagined its captain listening on his own receiver, counting pings, tasting diesel stink, deciding which fat silhouette to stalk once the escort's tired. Outside, propeller cavitation whined as ships fought to maintain interval through messy cross seas. Our stack belched sparks that died in sleet like fireflies. 1:15, we caught him. A corvette on the port beam reported radar contact low in the water. Range, 1,800 yards, closing. Star shells burst, flaring a ghostly stadium of light. For 3 seconds I saw it, conning tower slick with ice. Thin white bow wave slicing, blackness, before it crashed dove, leaving only boiling green. Guns bellowed anyway. Traces streaking into water, steam erupting where shells kissed. The corvette heeled, depth charges rolling off rails, blossoms of water kicking her stern skyward. I held headphones tight. Macready scribbled bearings with hands that shook, but still formed words. Flare light faded. Night swallowed detail. Only afterimages pulsed behind my eyelids, white gun flashes, tower silhouette. Over the phones, the corvette's operator reported air bubbles, oil sheen, then crackle, then dead frequency. I tried to raise him, nothing but roaring static and my own heartbeat. The frigate slid across our bow, sonar pings hammering. Another pattern dropped, hedgehog this time, each bomb hissing like a thrown kettle. Silence. Then a single muffled thud felt through souls. Sonar reported contact broken. No screws, no echo, just a smudge of debris rising. Victory? Maybe. Or maybe the Wolf nosed under a thermal layer again, engine silent, waiting for us to exhale. The captain ordered darken ship. Escorts resumed sweeping arcs. I logged times, ammunition expended, impressions of the kill, with caveat unconfirmed. Rain eased, small mercy. Yet wind kept its claws. Inside the shack, condensation ran down bulkheads like sweat. Macready slid onto the bench beside me, eyes too wide for the lamplight. Apprehensively, "Do they always look that close?" he asked. I shook my head. Not no, but not always yes either. Somewhere outside, depth charges still boomed in diminishing echoes, sound crawling the water's skin. I glanced at the barometer, still falling. Another low chasing us east. Storms within storms, men within steel, hunters within the dark water. I reached to steady the swallow pendant. It swung in erratic arcs, caught the lamplight, flashed once, metal glint like a Morse dot, then settled pointing forward again. Engines throbbed beneath, the trustworthy thud that says, still afloat. I tightened my life jacket anyway, slid headphones on, listened to static swirl. 2:30 now. Only 6 hours to dawn, and unknown miles of black Atlantic hiding stories not yet keyed. Beyond the receiver hiss, the ocean murmured a challenge I'd learned to accept but never answer, grimly. Hold your breath
and wait. See which pulse gives out first.
Wind hauled itself to a fresh octave just after 0330, raking the convoy with a keening note that set every stay wire thrumming. The sea rose as though summoned by choir, deep, muscular heaves that twisted the deck under my boots and made the bulkheads groan like waking animals. Each new crest slapped sleet across the bridge windows, erasing compass bearings until they reappeared a heartbeat later as dripping ghosts. I hunkered over the set, shoulders rounded, breath fogging the dial glass. Static had thickened into a wall of sand, auroral again, green fire somewhere high above, churning black, as if the heavens wanted to drown Morse in its own brand of hiss. The frigate sonar kept time, ping, ping, a metronome for nerves. Every return came back clean, yet too clean, an anechoic hollowness that felt staged. Wolves knew we listened. Sometimes they lay belly down on the seabed of cold layers, letting machinery idle, trusting water temperature to cloak them. On my log pad, I sketched small circles where bearings had intersected earlier, then shaded them darker each hour they went unanswered. The drawing looked uncomfortably like a wound blossoming. At 4 bells, the Boston kid brought fresh coffee, grounds floating like wreckage, but his hands shook enough to slosh half across the deck. He apologized. Gravely, I told him there'd come a night he'd sip without spilling, and when that happened, to worry. It meant he'd stopped feeling the danger. He laughed too loudly, nervous laugh, relief tinted with dread, wiped the mug on his sleeve, and took his post without another word. Moments later, the hull shivered in a way engines never cause, a stutter, not a throb. I felt it through the soles first, then through the tin cup humming on the bench. Before my mind spelled out torpedo, the lookout's shout cracked open the rain. "Port side, red flare!" I lunged for the port, wiped sleet with my cuff. A streak of crimson pierced the gloom, hung a breath, and sank behind a wave. Thoughtful. Signal for stragglers? No. White for that. Red meant fire. Or sinking. The master gyro screamed. We heeled into a hard left swing, convoy doctrine, to avoid patterned salvo. Bow smashed spray, ceiling high, drenching the shack windows so completely I saw nothing but rushing milk. Engines roared to 14 knots, bulkheads rattled like snare drums under too tight skins. The frigate's voice burst in my phones. Urgent. Torpedo hit on Oiltown Star, column 5, heavy fires on deck, may explode, escorts closing. I copied, head swimming, the name punched breath from lungs. Oiltown Star carried aviation gas, a floating bomb now lit. I cracked the shack door, flame already tinted clouds 20 cables off, a sullen orange dome flickering through sleet. Thunderous whumps rolled across swells as tanks ruptured. Shockwaves slapped our plates, making rail stanchions ring. Men on weather deck froze, silhouettes etched by hell's lantern. Then training kicked them forward, dogging hatches, freeing fire hoses already pointless at that distance. I forced the door shut against chemical stench drifting thick as tar. More Morse hammered in. 3 separate hands at once, each claiming periscope sightings. Bearings crisscrossed like angry stitches near the crippled tanker. Wolfpack tactics, wound 1, wait for rescues, strike again. Escort commanders split. Half to smother the fire, half to hunt the shooters. Through headphones I heard their tense, clipped orders, tension coiled tight as piano wire. A captain entered,
face slick with rain, but eyes ferocious. "We're staying calm," he snapped before I could ask. "If they come for us, you holler. Don't spare the key." He left, oilskin snapping behind him. Responsibility weighed heavier than steel in that instant. The receiver felt suddenly small, the ether monstrously vast. A deeper thud. No, a succession of them rolled through water. Depth charges. Close. Close again. Each boom shifting the air in the shack like the pump of a massive lung. The swallow charm jumped, danced against the bulkhead, then steadied. I logged times, ship names, code groups, fingers moving faster than thought. Outside, sleet turned back to snow, flakes huge and wet, smothering sound, so every subsequent blast felt half-heard, half-imagined. At 0512, a new SOS erupted. Different fist, panicked spacing. "This is SS Rowley. Urgent. Torpedoed in engine room. Strained. Steering gone. Listing 15 degrees. Position placed her 2 hull lengths ahead of us. Port column. I swung the direction finder. Needle quivered dead on the bearing. Our own flank mate. I beat the brass alarm. 3 rapid strikes. Even from inside, I felt the ship break, propellers chewing cavitation. Helm orders shouting over voice pipe, commanding hard starboard, then resume, then hard starboard again. Captain weaving to keep the crippled vessel from sliding under our bows. The snow parted for a heartbeat, revealing Rowley canted to port, stern dipped low, steam venting from split plates like geysers. No flame yet. Her cargo was canned food and pig iron, but water spurted from scupper holes in white fountains. Crew crowded the weather rail, tossing rafts prematurely. One raft flipped, men vanishing under the froth. I bit back bile and slammed the door, forced focus on the set. An escort demanded Rowley's moniker code for demolition clearance in case abandonment became final. I relayed, flatly, voice flat, professional, heart screaming behind sternum. Another ping sequence. Slower. Ominous. Bloomed through the hull. The frigate's ASDIC man shouting, "Contact bearing 035. Range 800. My pad nearly tore as I wrote. Hedgehog pattern away. 15 seconds. 1 detonation. Then a second. Louder, followed by a deep cracking roar that seemed to rise from keel to crow's nest. Phones squealed, cut to silence. Then jubilant voice. Large air pocket. We got him. Cheering. Cheers erupted topside, but I kept one ear angled for retribution. Wolves hunt in packs. 1 kill rarely empties the sea. Snow thickened again, blank curtain. Fire on the tanker painted underside of cloud lurid orange, turning flakes pink as they drifted past portholes. Rowley's list slowed, pumps still working maybe. Orders came to attempt tow at first light if seaworthy. Macready, whispering, "How do we tow anything with sharks still around?" I had no answer, only tapped the swallow once for luck. Dawn bled in, colorless, sun a nickel behind gauze. The storm still raged, but light revealed chaos. Oiltown star blazing like a floating volcano, smoke streaking leeward for miles, Rowley limping under jury steering, an escort circling debris field peppered with life vest orange spots that spasmed, then stilled. I copied the casualty manifests as they arrived. Names I'd never meet, saved only in carbon ink. Immersion suits rustled outside shack, deckhands prepping boat parties. Our own ship volunteered search detail. The captain believed hunting survivors was worth the risk. We fell out of column long enough to lower number 2 motorboat. Through the port, I watched faces vanish behind spray, engines sputtering into heavy chop. MacCready leaned near the glass, eyes wide, whispering prayers he'd never admitted knowing. Snow eased to clawing drizzle. Waves no gentler, but at least visible. Antenna iced over. I dispatched him topside with a mallet to knock frozen sleet free before signals died entirely. He returned soaked, triumphant, one glove missing, but grin returned. "Spars singing again," he said. I nodded, thankful for small victories. At 0900, escorts confirmed the U-boat kill. Debris nets hauled human remains, scraps of pressure hull with German stenciling. One predator fewer. Radio circuits buzzed with tempered relief. But Hammerpack still tallied at least 6 operational boats ahead of us, plus stragglers astern. Admiralty ordered emergency doglegs south, deeper into the Gale, where air patrols could reach. Better seas for submarines, too, but strategy sometimes means choosing which devil knows your name louder. We came about, bows punching new heading. The fireball that was Oiltown's star dwindled on the quarter until it was sunrise behind us, unnatural and furious. Rowley trailed under tow, pumps still snarling, her stack coughing gray defeat. The frigate shepherded both like a stern ant, guns still trained on invisible water devils. Inside, the shack smelled of ozone, sweat, and wet wool. Odor of persistence. I made a new sheet in the log, wrote the date, underlined it hard. Then softer, I penciled 2 phrases in the margin. One, wolf down, and weather still falling. Opposite truths balanced like dice yet to land. Coffee arrived thicker, bitterer, and settled warm in gut. Snow flickered past the porthole, melted on the glass, crawled downward like exhausted ghosts. I watched each rivulet vanish and wondered which would become tomorrow's story in some other radioman's log. The Atlantic has no archive, only current pages. The captain's voice sounded behind me, gentler than night's bark. "Keep ears open," he said. Hand on my shoulder for a second too long. Weight of trust. Gravely, "Hammer isn't finished." He left, coat swirling damp air into the shack. I looked at the swallow pendant. It hung motionless despite the sea's upheaval, wings tarnished, eyes dull but still pointing the way ahead. East, into gray unknown. I took the key, sent a single letter V, victory, ? Challenge, and listened as its echo dissolved in static bigger than any triumph. Night finally thinned into a bruised lavender dawn, and the gale sagged just enough for the search boats to claw back aboard. They brought 8 souls, 5 breathing, 3 wrapped in tarpaulin, hauled up on scrambling nets that slapped the hull like penitent hands. The sea huffed under our plates, resentful we'd stolen anything back. I logged the names they could still say, and folded the slip into the captain's pocket. He nodded once, eyes already on the next horizon. Fog rolled in with uncanny speed, a slow, white stampede that swallowed columns whole. Radar lost half the convoy in milk. The frigate's skipper suggested spreading so any torpedo would find more water than steel, but our old man shook his head. "Tighter, lads. Wolves can't bite what they can't see." We bunched until you could smell your neighbor's bunker fumes through the murk and hear his prop beat answer your own. Inside the shack, the fog muffled every clang and shout. Even sonar pings reached me as faint heartbeats through steel. Static softened, became a winter hush. I almost relaxed. Then a new fist tapped 3 slow letters. Q, Q, Q. Enemy surface raider sighted. Wrong threat, wrong decade, but code is code. Bearing marked it 2 miles off our bow, dead in the blind pocket between escorts. The captain ordered full ahead. We felt it instantly. Diesels roaring, deck trembling. Aft gun crews slewed turrets by sound alone, barrels vanishing into vapor. The Boston kid's knuckles whitened on the DF loop. I spun frequency dials. Nothing. Then a distorted, coarse burst in German. "Schwarzfisch meldet Kontakt, vorbereiten Angriff." Blackfish reporting contact, preparing attack. Not a raider, just another U-boat bluffing with surface gun.
Escort sirens wailed. Depth charges thundered blind into cotton. The blast shock punched our teeth. Fog lit, sulfur yellow, then collapsed dark again. A second, deeper boom followed, hull imploding somewhere below. Sonar screamed, contact lost. Cheers skipped round the voice circuits, then fell when ping echoes rolled back clean. Maybe a kill. Maybe only a blown ballast tank. The Atlantic never prints receipts. At mid-morning, the fog shredded into ragged scarves, revealing the convoy intact but scarred. Oiltown stars, black pillars still staining sky astern. Rowley sagging under tow ahead. The frigate signaled she'd burned half her hedgehogs and 2/3 of depth charges. We answered with our own truth. Radio valves hot, coffee gone, crew still game. Admiralty diverted us south toward RAF range. We angled into swell, gray chops slapping plates in grudging applause. By noon, a pair of Catalinas droned overhead, their engines a lullaby nobody trusted. The wolves faded. No high-band chatter, no sonar whispers, only diesel hum and the creak of tired hulls chasing the promise of air cover. In late afternoon, the fog tried one last encore, rising pale and thin like breath from a dying fire, then drifted away. Ireland's western swell announced itself in long green shoulders. Gulls appeared, fat, impudent, fighting over nothing but wind. I wrote the new position, underlined a single word: Landfall. The pad stayed dry. For once, blank space meant peace, not absence. At dusk, the captain stepped into the shack, oilskin folded over one arm. He read my log, traced a finger under the last entry, and exhaled as though laying down an anvil. "We'll make Liverpool tomorrow night, if no one does anything heroic," he said. I managed a half smile. He saw the swallow pendant, tapped it gently, gently. "Keep her pointing east one more day, Sparks." then give the bird a rest. I tuned to the BBC for the first time since departure, light orchestra crackle bleeding through static. Out on deck, sailors gathered near number 2 hatch, sharing the tinny waltz through a speaker rigged to the voice pipe. The tune carried over diesel throb and the hiss of spray, sweet and improbable. Somewhere aft, Rowley's pumps clattered on, stubborn heartbeat of a ship refusing obituary. Darkness settled clean, no sleet, no gunfire, just a tremor of engines and the low nick of the gyro. I logged final weather, dogged the shack door, and stood on the wing deck. Fog ghosts lingered in cargo winch shadows. Beyond them, a thin seam of stars opened. The convoy's shapes were only suggestions, slate silhouettes sliding east. No flares, no searchlights. The war existed, of course, it always did, but for this small span of night, it felt penned outside the circle of faint red bridge lamps. I rested gloved fingers on the rail, Morse pulsing through memory. Calls heard, calls lost, the stubborn beat of day that stitched fear to resolve. I let the sea's rhythm answer back, a code older than wire. Somewhere ahead awaited dockside cranes, soot-streaked pubs, maybe letters that said, "Stay alive." Behind lay wreckage burning under cold fog, names scratched into carbon, and one U-boat that might or might not sit crushed on the shelf. 7 minutes of silence, thoughtful. 7 minutes of mercy. Long enough to breathe, sad, not long enough to forget. The swallow pendant swung once in the wind, then aligned true east and froze, guiding needle, fragile promise, hopeful, small permission to believe that tomorrow, short pause, just maybe, longing, nobody would need to hear my fist hammer SOS into the dark. Morning crept over the Irish Sea wearing a tarnished silver grin. Wind dropped to a polite murmur, the kind pilots call good landing weather, and sailors distrust on principle. Low clouds peeled back to show an unsteady sun, and far ahead, the pencil-sketch coast of Wales. Radar picked up escorts from western approaches, sleek Hunt-class destroyers that looked too sharp for this tired convoy. Their challenge lamps flickered interrogation. Our mast answered with proper obeisance. The Hunts swung round, ushering us toward Liverpool Bay like cavalry relieving infantry that had crawled far enough. Traffic density climbed fast. Coasters, patrol trawlers, barrage balloon barges drifting like gray jellyfish. Their patchwork hulls made a quilt of war's leftovers. Our overballasted freighters threaded the seams with the hesitation of men walking through graves. I copied harbor approach orders, voice circus buzzing with civilian accents I hadn't heard in weeks, scouse vowels bright as brass. A tugmaster cracked a joke about charging extra for burnt paint and busted soles, and got 3 shipside laughs, 2 of them genuine. The estuary smelled of coal smoke, tidal mud, and something green, life returning between tides. We rode the ebb past New Brighton's sad, shuttered funfair. Its Ferris wheel stood rigid against the sky like AA mount that dreamed of music instead of flak.
Our gunners stared at it with mild suspicion until they realized the spokes were only rust-catching sun.
Port Authority funneled us single file up the channel. Oiltown Star's flaming carcass no longer stained our wake. She had foundered in the night, escorts marking the spot for later salvage. But Rowley limped ahead, still under tow, pumps coughing heroically. Observational. I saw her chief engineer on deck, boiler suit white salted, one fist raised to our bridge in ragged salute. Our captain returned it, cap brim trembling just once. Crowds clustered on the pier head. Despite the siren risk, women in factory smocks, stevedores on unpaid break. A knot of schoolboys waving anything cloth could become. From distance, they looked like flags themselves, small, hopeful pennants. The Boston kid leaned from a rail, stared as if unsure they were real. Gently. "Not all of England's rubble," I told him, and he nodded, eyes shining wet or wind red, thoughtful. I couldn't say which. Tugs kissed our bows, lines caught bollards, screws thumped astern into silence. Short pause. Deck plates felt suddenly weightless, returning gravity of land. Engines sighed down the scale until only cooling metal pinged the shack bulkhead. Solemnly, I signed off final position, keyed a simple QRT to Mersey radio, then rested fingertips on the silent key as though it were a pulse gone still. The swallow pendant hung motionless, relieved. Goal achieved. Customs climbed aboard first. Clipboards, khaki armbands, earnest questions. Behind them, the medical officer logged fevers, frostbite counts, one case of trench foot from a lifeboat soaked in aviation fuel. Survivors disembarked under Red Cross blankets that flapped like surrendered sails. A dock crane swung over number 2 hold. Its hook rattled, but the slab of hatch steel beneath never flinched. Evidence that even cargo gear can look tired. Orders came to keep crew aboard till debrief. Admiralty teams wanted raw testimony, times, bearings, names of boats we thought we'd killed. I brought my carbon log to a prefab shed smelling of damp plywood and Maxwell House. Intelligence officers leafed through pages with surgical fingers, thoughtful, murmuring approval when notations matched other ships. One asked if I could still hear the German fist that bragged about the Oiltown Star strike. I said, sad, yes. In dreams, the cadence etched circles I couldn't erase. He wrote that down too. Afternoon light drifted pewter to brass. They finally released us at 17:30. Shore leave passes slid across a table cluttered with half-smoked cigarettes. MacCready tucked his under his dog-tag chain, already plotting the shortest path to a pint. I hesitated, then stepped back aboard, needed one last loop through the empty shack. Tubes had cooled, glass dark, but a faint ozone ghost lingered. I unwound the swallow pendant, slipped it into a breast pocket, and felt its small weight settle like punctuation. Dusk fell with civilian casualness, no blackout sirens yet. I walked the dock toward the Mariners' Chapel, where a low bell tolled vespers.
Inside, candles guttered before plaques of earlier wars. Fresh wood waited for new names. I added 2 coins to the offertory box, money earned sailing past floating pyres, and whispered the call signs of ships no longer answering. Soundless Morse. No priest needed to translate. Back outside, the city hummed, tram lines sparking, dray horses clopping. A girl somewhere at something not remotely heroic. I let the noise wash the static from my ears until only heartbeat remained. On the quay, a naval band tuned up for a ship farther downriver. Their cornet warmed scales that spiraled into night air like dots and dashes made of brass. I almost saluted, caught myself, stuffed hands in pockets instead. Snow had followed us across an ocean, but chose not to fall. The sky held it in reserve, merciful for one evening. Street lamps, newly unhooded for the dusk lull, cast halos on wet cobbles. Faces drifted through those cones of light, some relieved, some merely late for supper, all oblivious to a radio man measuring peace by the absence of ping echoes. I realized the clock had slipped past 159 meters of spoken pages in my mind. The tape would end here, a breath shy of 2 hours, leaving space for silence that listeners could fill with their own sea. I turned back toward the ship, toward the next charter not yet inked. Somewhere, deep in her engine room, a watchstander tapped a wrench on rail in idle rhythm. Dot, dot, dot. Pause. I smiled, answered with my fist on the gangway stanchion. Dash, dot, pause, and felt the conversation stitch night to hull, hull to harbor, harbor to horizon. The story wasn't finished. Convoys never are, but for one narrow corridor of time between wars and storms, the frequency lay clear, the receiver at rest. I walked on, boots clicking Morse across the cobblestones, ready for whatever reply the Atlantic would send next.